There are some players seeing fantastic roles and usage that you need to know about. These guys are rising up my rankings, not just for this week, but the rest of the season. And it begins with the Bills tight end, Dalton Kincaid, who's seen his role expanded the past 2 games. And you can see on our official data partner Fantasy Life right here, in week 7, he sees 22% of the targets, a season high 8 targets, and catches them all. So this was great to see, but his underlying usage in this game remained the same. He ran about 60% of the routes, basically was still splitting the tight end role with Dawson Knox. But then we got this news early last week that Dawson Knox wasn't going to play in their Thursday night football game for week 8, and he was going to get put on the IR and miss at least the next 4 games, opening up a potential tight end 1 role for Dalton Kincaid. And that's exactly what we got, as Kincaid saw a season high 85% of the routes run, and it led to this right here, a 17.5 point performance, very strong now for back-to-back games of production, 7 targets, finds the end zone, and the big thing was he was looking really good, really agile out there, which is what we expected when they drafted him. So now over these past 2 games, Kincaid ranks 4th in tight end usage, and this is normally what we see. Rookie players start to see larger roles as the season goes on, and now he's benefiting from a Dawson Knox injury as well. And if you're not familiar, this should probably sustain as long as he keeps seeing a high amount of routes run, which he should, because he's a really productive player. His final year in college last year, 96 targets in 12 games, averaging 8 targets per game as a tight end is fantastic. So Kincaid is a top 8 tight end the rest of the season because now his usage has increased. He should be running around 30 routes per week in a really good offense with a solid QB. And this guy has a great schedule coming up against the Bengals and Broncos, who feature 2 bottom 5 secondaries so far this season, according to Pro Football Focus. So Kincaid is rising up the rankings, and so is another rookie. And this is the Seahawks second-round running back, Charbonnet, out of UCLA, because he saw season-high usage in week 8. He earned 31% of the carries and saw a lot of second-half usage. He actually split the backfield usage in the second half with Kenneth Walker. And this led to Charbonnet being really efficient. On his 5 carries on the ground, he was averaging over 10 yards per touch, and then he had 7 total touches in this game for 64 yards, and that's really all this guy has done all year long. He's just been efficient per touch, but there might be a reason why Kenneth Walker didn't see as much usage as he normally does. And that could be explained right here, as Jeff Mueller points out. Kenneth Walker, coming into last week, you can see here, he had 2 did not participate in practices in the week, and then he got a practice later in the week, so he was definitely banged up heading into this game, which can explain his season low 44% of the snaps, and a larger role, majority of the snaps, is what Charbonnet saw in this game. But it is worth pointing out that after the game, Pete Carroll kind of just said, yeah, Charbonnet had a hot hand, we gave him the ball, which makes sense because he was averaging 10 yards per touch. Can we trust Pete Carroll? He's kind of fibbed a lot in the past, but it makes sense in this situation because the dude has been efficient, like we said earlier, 5.8 yards per touch. He only has 36 touches this year, so he doesn't qualify to be in the rankings here, but if he did, he would actually be in the top 10 based on this efficiency per touch. Now, I don't believe that Charbonnet is taking over Kenneth Walker's role. I do believe that Kenneth Walker was banged up last week, and even when banged up, he still averaged over 8 yards per carry, and he's been solid all year long. But this is just a reminder that Charbonnet is a top 5 handcuff in fantasy football and should not be on the waiver wire in nearly 60% of leagues. Because if something happens to Kenneth Walker, and we hope that it doesn't, well, Charbonnet becomes somebody that people are dropping $75 to $100 on heading into the fantasy playoffs on their free agent fab budgets. Charbonnet is a borderline top 100 player the rest of the year. Add him if you can. And now let's talk about Gus Edwards, who has to be rising up the rankings because these last couple of games, he's been a workhorse running back for the Ravens. He's battled injuries for the most part of this year, but these last 2 weeks, 54% of the snaps, so the majority of the snaps, and the key here, 66% of the rush attempts, and that has grown from week 7 to week 8 to where you saw a season high 68% of the carries. And keep this in mind, that also factors in Lamar Jackson's rush attempts, but when you just look at what he was doing compared to the other running backs, he was seeing over 80% of the running back carries in week 8. And per usual, Gus Edwards has been efficient per touch. His 4.8 yards per touch is top 20 in the NFL. This guy is one of a handful of players, like 3 in NFL history, that have averaged 5 yards per carry every year of his career. We'll see if he could do that this year over the second half of the season. Now, Edwards is rising up the rankings, but he's not like a top 15 running back the rest of the year because you know what you're getting out of him here. You're getting a guy who's basically going to see 15 plus carries, some red zone work, not get passing game usage, and still split a backfield with Lamar Jackson. But he has seen that exact usage lately, and it's paying off. 3 straight games of 14 plus carries, back-to-back games of 20 plus total fantasy points. So yeah, he's a strong running back too, and or flex option in basically all league formats. Now, I won't lie, after this beneficial matchup that he had on the road against the Cardinals, it's a tough schedule for him. The Seahawks and the Browns aren't great. Then he gets a decent spot against the Bengals, but you scroll a little bit more and a lot of other matchups that aren't all that good. The Chargers is a nice spot, but he gets the Rams, he gets the Jaguars, he gets the 49ers. So he has like 2 out of his next 6 matchups are beneficial, but it comes down to basically, will he get the red zone work? And he probably will. So Edwards is rising up the rankings, and so is this next rookie. Again, we're talking about a lot of rookies this week. And before we get into the next player, 66% of you who are watching this are not subscribed. It takes 2 seconds just to check. Some people just don't know that they're not, and hit the subscribe button. It will help me out, but also let you see my future content more easily. And that's because the rookies just start to see larger roles as the season goes on. It's Quentin Johnston who had his best game of the season for himself and of his career, that means this past week. Now, we must point out that Gerald Everett didn't play in this game, and Josh Palmer was nowhere near 100%, at one point having to go into the medical tent. He was screaming in pain, and then coming back in the game, he wasn't 100%. But that being said, we still saw Quentin Johnston go out there and run 66% of the routes, but the big thing, he saw a season high 17% of the targets earned, and this led to a solid day. He brought in 5 of 6 targets for 50 yards, 10 fantasy points, much better than what he's done in the past, albeit it was a great matchup and some guys were banged up on his team. We'll take the production. And even better, his average depth of target was just 8 yards downfield in week 8. That's good. Those are easy to complete passes compared to nearly 27 yards downfield in week 7. And we'll take that because when you get the easy receptions, then you can pick up yards after the catch, which is what this guy was known for coming out of college. So if this type of usage can continue, we should see his catchable target rate. Like you can see right here, only 46% of his targets this year have been catchable. That ranks right now 100th in the NFL. That is terrible, obviously. So if we can start to see these in the shorter areas of the field, it should be better for his overall production and just ability to have more catchable targets. So a solid game here should boost his confidence and at the very least boost the confidence of his coaches, which will lead to more opportunities. And here's another thing to point out. If his role keeps expanding, it's going to be good once the end of the season comes into the fantasy playoffs. The final 4 games of the year, including the playoffs, he gets the Patriots bottom 10 secondary, the Broncos bottom 3 secondary, the Raiders bottom half of the league secondary, and then he gets a Bills matchup that could feature a lot of points. And oh yes, I can't forget that in the fantasy championships, if you are fortunate enough to make it there, and that's the goal of this channel, he'll get the Broncos again. So I am looking to add Quentin Johnston or include him in some trades if I can get a package deal going. Now we have to talk about this next guy who's a borderline top 5 player the rest of the season. And that player is Travis Etienne, who seems like he's in this video every week, and it's because he just keeps producing. He's a top 8 player in my rest of season rankings, and I wouldn't argue with you if you said he's a top 5 option. Because this past week, he somehow, even though he's been dominant all year long, saw yet again season high usage. 88% of the snaps and 83% of the rush attempts were a season high, and then his passing game usage was his most since week 1. This led to a very strong day of nearly 150 total yards and elite 27 touches. It seems like all this guy does is get 20 touches a week and 26 fantasy points in what was supposed to be a tougher matchup against the Steelers defensive line. So now Etienne, over his last 5 games, has averaged 23.6 touches, ranking first among all RBs. And that is first ahead of Christian McCaffrey during that time. We are talking about Travis Etienne having the best role out of any fantasy running back right now. And now the one negative you can point to is that, oh, he only ranks 22nd in red zone touches, just 14 red zone touches. Yeah, because he's scoring all of his touches outside the red zone. He has 8 total touchdowns this season, and most of them have come from 20 plus yards out. Now, in his next matchup, he'll face the 49ers, as you can see up here at home, and this is a defense that has been struggling. And then a couple weeks after that, he gets the Texans, who are arguably one of the worst run defenses in the league. So these next couple weeks, it should continue. So that's a backfield and a player that's trending up, but let's talk about a backfield that's trending down. Now, that backfield that is trending down is the Bears backfield, because honestly, I'm pretty concerned that D'Onta Foreman finding success for that massive 3-touchdown game in week 7 is likely going to ruin the upside of everybody in this backfield, including Foreman. Because Khalil Herbert is just one more week on IR away from returning to this backfield that probably will remain somehow, some way a 3-headed backfield. Because we already got a bit of a sample of this in week 8 where 3 running backs were used and Foreman only saw 30% of the snaps after being the clear workhorse the week before that. Roschon Johnson returned and even Darrington Evans was involved in a Tyson Bagent-led offense. You can see the usage of the other running backs right here. Darrington Evans, 27% of the snaps. Now, some of this was in garbage time, but also early on when he's scoring a rushing touchdown. And then 37% of the snaps for Roschon Johnson actually led the backfield because they were trailing for most of the game, and he's the main, at least out of these options, passing down back. Now, I do expect Herbert to clearly take the role of Darrington Evans, who will be phased out of this offense, and get back to being the lead back in this offense. But how good will it be? Because the last time we saw Khalil Herbert for a fully healthy game, it was against the Denver Broncos, where he saw 79% of the snaps and had a 25-point game. So maybe if he can produce, he'll carve out another big role like this, but the team clearly likes Roschon Johnson in a passing down role, and it seems like D'Onta Foreman is going to hang around for at least 20 to 30% of the snaps. So that's a backfield that I'm avoiding, but we have to talk about a tight end that I'm trying to get on every single one of my teams. But before we get to that player, I have to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint. If you want to win your fantasy league, this is for you. Every day of the week, I'll send you a tool that will help you do just that, for the waiver wire, for your trades, rest of season rankings, for projections that specific week, or the game-by-game matchup notes. This is something that every single week there's thousands of people using to win that specific matchup. Here's a snippet of the game-by-game matchup notes. We filter it by wide receiver. You can see the wide receivers matchup, specifically cornerback, wide receiver, what the advantage is, what the wide receiver is good at doing, what the cornerback has allowed or not allowed this year. Now, that's just one small glimpse of what you get in there, and it's easy to acquire. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And that will take you to this page where you follow these 2 easy steps, but I want to call this out right here. It's just $5. For the entire year, it's just $5 no matter when you sign up. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I refund that $5. So this is make your fantasy playoffs, or it's completely risk-free. Yes, free, risk-free. So to get access to your blueprint today with the thousands of other fellas, just scan the QR code on the screen or click that that link in the description below. Now, that player I'm trying to get on every single one of my teams is Sam LaPorta, who's had a great year all season long, but somehow it became even better in week 8. Because LaPorta ran a season high 95% of the routes and saw a season high 31% of the targets. Literally season high usage in week 8, despite the fantastic top 5 season already for this rookie. Now, this usage led to a great game. On 10 targets, he puts up nearly 20 fantasy points, finds the end zone again in a good matchup against the Raiders, and he adds 8 more receptions to his season total, now ranking top 4 amongst all tight ends in catches. He's easily a top 5 tight end the rest of the season, and he's somebody that I'd rather have him over guys like George Kittle, Derrick Henry, and Calvin Ridley, which just sounds crazy to say. But he's extremely efficient, and he's operating as one of the top options in the Lions' number 4 passing offense this season. Yeah, it's hard not to like that. Now, this next man is somebody we talked about last week, but I want to remind you about him, and he had another solid week in week 8. And it's Marquise Brown, who continues to rise up the rankings after a nice 9-target, 15-point performance in the last game. He now has 27 targets over the last 3 games, so 9 per week, which is solid usage and solid volume. Now, he hasn't had any massive spike weeks because his quarterback has struggled. Just this past week, Josh Dobbs on 37 attempts barely threw for 200 yards, had a couple of interceptions, but now this guy's not his quarterback. This guy was traded to Minnesota because Kyler Murray has not been on the Cardinals injury report. There's a chance that he plays in week 9, although maybe they'll save him for an easier matchup for his debut in week 10 after they have to face a difficult defense this week. But this is great for Marquise Brown because last year, before he got injured and fractured his foot with Kyler Murray, Brown was a top 5 wide receiver, averaging 18.3 fantasy points on 10 targets per game. So Brown has legit top 15 wide receiver upside, but since he hasn't had a spike week in now like 4+ weeks, it's likely your league mate who owns him doesn't view it this way. So I'm looking to buy low on Marquise Brown. He's easily rising up my rankings for this week if Kyler Murray plays and the rest of the season, no doubt about it. Now, a player who is trending down is James Cook, despite seeing strong usage in week 8. Look, here's the deal. In week 8, he saw 66% of the snaps, a season high basically, and 64% of the rush attempts for the 2nd straight week. I mean, this should all be fantastic. He's commanding the usage on the ground, but there's an issue. Cook is not being involved in the passing game where his upside was supposed to come from. Over the last 2 weeks, he's only seen 5% of the targets. That's the exact same target share that 33-year-old running back Latavius Murray has seen, and Murray has been used in more advantageous situations in the passing game like the 2-minute offense. But this is the real reason why James Cook is trending down, because we just saw the Bills sign the veteran Leonard Fournette, who is somebody who knows how to catch passes. We saw him have the 4th most targets in the NFL just a year ago with the Bucs, and he's solid in pass protection. Look, Fournette was not efficient last season, 68th in true yard per carry, just 40th in yards per touch amongst running backs, but he did claim that he was dealing with a Liz Frank injury, and look, he's an older running back. The reason they're bringing him in is somebody who can pass protect for Josh Allen and probably catch some balls, which clearly crushes the upside or at least the consistency of James Cook. Now, Cook's still going to be involved because he's highly efficient. His 5.7 yards per touch is top 10 in the NFL this season, but this is probably going to mean he's going to have more boom or bust weeks because he's not getting the red zone usage, and now he's going to lose even more passing game work. So Cook is definitely dropping in the rest of the season rankings. If you could trade him, I would. There's probably not much value out there for him, a market, but maybe you could put him in some sort of package deal. Now let's do some quick hitters of guys rising up the rankings, because Alvin Kamara is easily a top 15 overall player the rest of the season, a borderline top 5 running back, because all he's doing, he's not being, I would say, the most productive player on the ground here. 59 rushing yards on 17 attempts, but overall, another 100+ yard game, multiple touchdowns, continues to catch passes. This looks great. CeeDee Lamb's usage also looks great over these last 2 games, earning a 23% and then a massive 41% target share. This past week, he was the highest scoring player on the overall slate. Hey, if you wanted to sell high on him, I think you could. Depends who you get in return, but he is a top 10 player the rest of the season, so I'm probably holding him as the gem that you have on your roster. And I am also easily holding, like we talked about in a previous video this week, Gabe Davis, because he just had his best game of the year, 12 targets, a team high and season high for him, 31% target share, because the team changed the way that they're operating their offense with Dawson Knox out. They use more 3 wide receiver sets, and instead of Davis going downfield more, he got some read option plays, and he was targeted in the short area of the field. Now that's exciting because those short area targets lead to more catchable passes and yards after the catch, which just means your performances are more consistent. If that continues, he'll be a top 25 receiver the rest of the way. Now, Javonte Williams has also been great the last 2 weeks. He's seen 63% and 82% of the rush attempts. This also factors in a couple of quarterback runs, so he's seen 72% of the carries these last 2 games. It's probably closer to 80% when you just look at the running back usage. That's obviously encouraging to see as he pushes his way towards the top 15 running backs for the rest of the year. We also got a bounce back week out of Calvin Ridley in a nice matchup. Now, he doesn't find the end zone. He doesn't hit a 100-yard bonus if your league has that, but 10 targets going into the bye week, trying to get healthy after some nagging injuries that he said in an interview he's been dealing with. All right, we got to talk about Jahmyr Gibbs, who over the last 2 weeks has been absolutely dominant. Look how dominant. According to Alex Caruso on Twitter, he has the most fantasy points these last 2 weeks, ahead of Alvin Kamara, who's been dominant, and even Christian McCaffrey. Now, David Montgomery is set to return after their bye week, and I do think that he'll go right back to being the red zone back, but you could expect more of a split in between the 20s, which should lead to some boomer bust weeks for Gibbs. So these are the players that are rising up my rankings heading into week 9 and for the rest of the season. Now, if you want to see the guys you don't really want on your team, maybe you try and trade them for some of these guys, well, check out this video right here. And if you are one of the 66% of people watching this video who is not subscribed, 2 seconds of your time if you made it to the end, check that you are subscribed, hit that subscribe button as it helps me, but it also lets you see my future content more easily.